Hello and welcome to the Orthodox Oasis. My name is Jerome Hieronymus, and what you're about to watch is a VOD of the Orthodox Oasis over on Twitch. So feel free to join us live as we play games, hang out, and chat about Orthodox stuff. Otherwise, enjoy this VOD and we'll see you soon. Have a great day. Wow. Alright, next one's the myth of past unity. Alright, let's go.
Hi, this is Bill Marianis, host of
The Orthodox Church is the historical church.
It's a long one. This will finish it up for the night, I think.
And those who count themselves as Orthodox Christian share a uniquely historical
It
consciousness.
won't. I was
Understanding
wrong.
the saints, priests, and Orthodox laymen of the past play a crucial part in their journeys toward salvation. However, there is one area of Orthodox history that very few of us know anything about: the story of Orthodoxy in the Americas. Ancient Faith Radio is thus happy to present American Orthodox History with Matthew Namey. Matthew is a writer and lecturer specializing in early American Orthodoxy and the Associate Director of the Society for Orthodox Christian History in the Americas.
It's my really great joy to introduce our next speaker, Matthew Namey. At conferences of this sort, most often the introductions go along these lines. You indicate the person's degrees, academic affiliations, things of this sort. This is unnecessary and maybe even impossible in the case of Matthew, because he is what I believe would be called in German a Privatgelehrter, a private, an independent scholar. He will be speaking on the title of his presentation, The Myth of Past Unity. And it is an exciting, I've read earlier drafts, an exciting revisiting of the history of Orthodoxy in America, the late 19th, the early 20th century, continuing into the 20th century. This is a study of the past, but it has some implications for the present and our way of understanding our past. And lest you think this is just off the wall, I will emphasize again and repeatedly and on record and for podcasting and video, Matthew's outstanding qualifications in this area. In addition to being enthusiastic, the subject of Orthodoxy in America and the history of Orthodoxy in America, in addition to having a passion for the life of the Church today, for a united Orthodox witness and presence in America, Matthew knows so much about the history of Orthodoxy in America. In fact, I would go so far as to say I know no one who knows more about the history of Orthodoxy in America than Matthew Namey. Certainly that would be true for the late 19th, continuing through much of the 20th century, say 1850 through 1950. If I want to know
what level can these objects go up to?
Are
you serious?
In the Russian North American mission who transferred from one parish to another in a 4-year period of time, compared to the transfers within Greek parishes or Syrian, the amount of English used in parishes in the first decades of the 20th century, in one tradition or another, the person to ask is Matthew. And so I'm really overjoyed to present Matthew because I think he is a wonderful historian and adds a fresh and youthful note to our deliberations. He certainly gets us into the 21st century as well.
Boy, you young.
Thank you, Father. Before I speak, I was thinking about what the questioner had written in, and I thought I'd respond to that before I speak because I think it is relevant to what I'm about to say. There's a great British philosopher named Robin Collingwood who worked in the first half of the 20th century, and Collingwood wrote a lot about the philosophy of history and the work of history, and he said, and I'm quoting from memory here, so pardon me if it's not exact, but The only key to what man can do is what man has done. The study of the past, therefore, tells us what man has done and thus what man is. So I would argue that a proper understanding of our past is essential to a proper self-understanding, which is essential to moving forward in the future. So I do think dealing with the past is necessary and important before we can move on in the future. I'll begin now then. Orthodox Christians in America today are largely united. They share the same doctrine, the same liturgical tradition, and the same sacraments. Greek priests concelebrate with their Serbian counterparts. Antiochian students attend OCA seminaries. In many cities and regions, the various Orthodox churches have banded together to form elementary schools, nursing homes, and soup kitchens,
monsters,
and other efforts. English is increasingly emerging as the lingua franca. There is quite possibly more unity among American Orthodox Christians today than at any other time in history. Nevertheless, it is a fact that Episcopal territories overlap one another and that churches within mere miles of each other might answer to entirely different bishops. It is also true that the present situation is both organizationally inefficient and difficult to explain to inquirers. Discipline with regard to marriage, ordination, and the reception of converts can and often does differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. It is therefore understandable that there is a growing call from many quarters for the full administrative unification of the various jurisdictions. Advocates of administrative unity often cite the past as an example and an admonition. They say, "We were once united, and we should be again." Yet the common belief that there was once an American Orthodox Church which encompassed all the various ethnic groups is not supported by historical evidence. In fact, early Orthodoxy in America was characterized by ethnic separation. Now, before I go on, I need to just explain what I mean by unity. The term unity can have a variety of meanings. The unity which exists among the world's Orthodox churches globally is a unity of doctrine and sacraments.
Look at that fire bow.
The various local churches hold the same
That bow be
dogmas
fire.
and moral teachings.
Fire.
They acknowledge the legitimacy of one another's sacraments, and they practice intercommunion with each other. At times, they also share another kind of unity, the unity of cooperation, which would be an example maybe in ecumenical dialogues, for instance. This is a more practical manifestation of unity, and it isn't necessarily implied, I should say, by the presence of doctrinal or sacramental unity. We don't always cooperate, even though we might be in communion with each other. And finally, there is administrative unity, which involves a common institutional structure. This type of unity exists within each local church. So, for instance, the various dioceses of the Orthodox Church in Russia ultimately look to the leadership of the Moscow Patriarchate and its Holy Synod. Administrative unity involves both the presentation of a united common front to the outside world and the existence of an internal structure of interdependence and shared government. So based on these definitions, the Orthodox jurisdictions in America have and always have held the unity of doctrine and sacraments. And over the past several decades, there have been an increasing number of examples of cooperative unity on various levels, from the local to the national. However, the jurisdictions lack administrative unity, and it is this form of unity which receives a great deal of attention among American Orthodox Christians today. The most common explanation for the emergence of multiple jurisdictions can be found in The Orthodox Church by Metropolitan Kallistos Ware. He writes,
No!
The Orthodox of America, whatever their nationality, looked to the Russian Archbishop for leadership and pastoral care. After 1917, when relations with the Church of Russia became confused, each national group formed itself into a separate jurisdiction, and the present multiplicity of jurisdictions arose. Now, perhaps the most celebrated and often quoted essay on the subject of Orthodoxy in America was written by Father Alexander Schmemann as an introduction to the 1975 book Orthodox America, and I believe I even saw a copy of it outside on a table. To love is to remember, he wrote. In this essay, Schmemann describes a utopian American Orthodox past and the fall that destroyed it. He says, unity did exist, was a reality. The first epiphany of orthodoxy here was not as a jungle of ethnic ecclesiastical colonies serving primarily, if not exclusively, the interests of their various nationalisms and mother churches, but precisely as a local church meant to transcend all natural divisions and to share all spiritual values. He goes on to say, this unity was broken and then arbitrarily replaced with the unheard of principle of jurisdictional multiplicity, which denies and transgresses every single norm of Orthodox tradition. The situation which exists today is thus truly a sin and a tragedy, end quote. Now, the view that Orthodox unity in America was broken presupposes some person or persons responsible for the fracture. And besides the obvious Bolshevik culprits abroad, some have pointed the finger at ecumenical patriarch Meletios Metaxakis, who spearheaded the foundation of the Greek Archdiocese in 1921. In 1970, the Patriarchate of Moscow was poised to grant autocephaly to its estranged daughter, the Metropolia, thus creating the OCA, the Orthodox Church in America. Hearing of this, Ecumenical Patriarch Athenagoras wrote a letter of opposition to Patriarch Alexei I. Patriarch Alexei responded in part with the following argument. It is very well known, he writes, that orthodoxy on the American continent was established, developed, and organized by the Russian Orthodox Church. From 1794, the year of the arrival of the first missionaries from Russia, until 1921, the year marking the beginning of pluralism in church jurisdiction, the Orthodox Church in North America united all of the Orthodox in America under its hierarchical authority without regard for national background. This was recognized by all the local churches, including the Holy Church of Constantinople, presently headed by Your Holiness. However, this order, adequate to church canons and practice, was violated in 1921 when, without the knowledge and canonical approval of the Russian Orthodox Church, a Greek archdiocese was formed in America, end quote. Now, some scholars have disagreed with this claim. They've argued that the Greeks in America were always independent of the Russian hierarchy. Father Thomas Fitzgerald writes, although some authors have maintained that all Orthodox in America accepted the authority of the Russian bishop prior to 1921, there is not sufficient evidence to support this claim. The vast majority of the Greek parishes were organized without any contact with the Russian bishops in America. Recently, Father John Erickson has proposed a model of two spheres to explain the early Orthodox situation in America. He writes, parishes whose founding members came from old world churches that at the time lay outside what might be called the Russian sphere of influence, the Romanians, some Bulgarians, but especially the Greeks, were in practice independent of any authority beyond the local community. Erickson continues, immigrants coming from homelands within the Russian sphere of influence, Syro-Arabs, Serbs, Albanians, as well as those who identified themselves as Russian, generally turned to the bishops of the Russian Orthodox Church's North American missionary diocese, end quote. While helpful, this model still does not fully convey the great complexity which characterized this period. In 1890, only 2 Orthodox churches existed in the continental United States. There had been a Russian chapel in New York City from 1870 on, but in 1883, the Russian government decided to cut off its funding and close the chapel. With the abandonment of the New York mission, which was really more of an embassy chapel than a mission, the 7 largest cities in America were without an Orthodox church. As for the New Orleans parish, its jurisdictional position was ambiguous. The 1890 U.S. Census describes it as a part of the Church of Greece in connection with the Consulate of Greece in New Orleans. And it was actually founded many years earlier by the Greek consul in New Orleans. The first priest to serve at Holy Trinity in New Orleans was a man named Agapius Honcharenko. He was an itinerant Ukrainian of questionable credentials who was visiting New York City in 1865 when he was contacted by the New Orleans parish. Honcharenko certainly was not connected to the Russian church, and he even claimed that the Tsarist government had put a price on his head for his involvement in revolutionary activities. The New Orleans parish itself was not founded by the Russian hierarchy, and there would be no other Greek parishes or Orthodox parishes of any other kind until after 1890. Thus, I would argue that it is impossible to speak of any kind of overarching Orthodox unity in America in 1890, there being virtually no Orthodox presence in America to begin with. Now, those familiar with American Orthodox history may object at this point. Was not Orthodoxy already well established in Alaska, having been brought by Russian traders and then missionaries beginning in the 18th century? Of course, this is true. However, several facts should be considered. Until its purchase by the United States in 1867, Alaska was a part of the Russian Empire. It did not become an organized U.S. territory until 1912, and it did not achieve statehood until 1959. More significantly, Alaska is geographically divided from the U.S. mainland, and Alaskan Orthodoxy has a culture and history that are distinct from that of the rest of American Orthodoxy in the lower 48, as we would say today. Father Michael Alexa points out that by 1917, the vast majority of American Orthodox Christians lived in the continental United States and were, quote, immigrants from the Old World who were totally unaware of the history of the Alaskan Church. Alaskan Orthodoxy is its own important phenomenon, worthy of study, but only tangentially relevant to the history of Orthodoxy in the contiguous United States. So, getting back to the narrative, in 1891, again, there being only 2 Orthodox churches in the continental United States, there was a growing Greek community in New York City, and it began to organize itself. It formed an organization called the Society of Athena, and this was composed primarily of Greeks from Athens. The Baltimore Sun reported at the time that since the closing of the Russian chapel, they, the Greeks, have found the lack of spiritual aid and counsel to be a great drawback to happiness. So in 1891, the New York Greeks wrote to Archbishop Methodius of Syra, Greece. The Baltimore Sun reported, the Archbishop conferred with a dignitary at Athens, and the dignitary at Athens wrote to the Patriarch of Constantinople, and the Patriarch said, to be sure they must have a priest, as it is their souls are in peril. This was the newspaper article. Notwithstanding the involvement of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the priest who arrived in January of 1892, an Archimandrite Paisios Ferentinos, was appointed by the Metropolitan of the Greek Church in Athens. Thus began Holy Trinity Parish, nominally under the Church of Greece. Now, it was not long before a disagreement arose in this community. The New York Times reported simply that Holy Trinity was, quote, attended chiefly by the uptown colony of Greeks and did not fully meet the wants of those who lived at the lower end of the city. Father John Erickson, however, writes that a dissatisfied group wrote to the Patriarchate of Constantinople rather than to the Holy Synod of Greece, asking for a, quote, educated priest. In January 1894, an Archimandrite Kalinikos Thilves arrived in New York, and a second Greek parish, Annunciation, was born. This was the result of a direct appeal from a group of New York Greeks to the Patriarch of Constantinople himself. Thilves, the priest, an accredited representative of the Patriarch, according to what he told the newspapers, brought with him sacramental Holy Chrism, which had been consecrated by the Ecumenical Patriarch. Of course, in the Orthodox Church, the head of a given church consecrates typically the Holy Chrism, and so one may draw the conclusion that a priest with holy chrism from a given patriarch is probably under that patriarch, at least nominally. Given all of these pieces of evidence, it's apparent that the Annunciation community was founded, at least nominally, as a parish of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Now, the Russian Archdiocese finally returned to New York City in 1895, more than a decade after abandoning the city. A Russian-American journalist explained at the time that the Russian Orthodox resident in New York City are to have their own house of worship in the place of the Greek church organized by the Hellenic colony. The few local Russians apparently were attending the Greek churches in New York. Thus, when the Russian church returned to New York City in 1895, there were already 2 Greek churches present, one under Athens and one under Constantinople, neither of which acknowledged the authority of the Russian bishop. In Chicago in the late 1880s and early 1890s, a failed attempt was made to form a pan-Orthodox parish under Russian jurisdiction. Around the beginning of 1892, the Greeks in Chicago banded together and formed the Society of Lycurgus. As one member of the community explained, the society sent to the Metropolitan of Athens and asked him to send us a priest, leaving the choice to him. The Metropolitan selected Father Peter Fiambulis, who told the Chicago Tribune, "It is because I know something of English that Germanos, the Metropolitan of Athens, sent me on this mission." They would refer to it as a mission, just as St. Raphael would refer to his work as a mission work, or Sebastian Dabovich. A month later, a Russian Orthodox church was organized in Chicago. So literally a month after the Greek church was organized, a Russian church was formed. For the first time, 2 Orthodox parishes answering to different ecclesiastical authorities coexisted in the same American city. The Chicago Tribune reported that one of the churches is the Orthodox or regular Russian church, acknowledging the primacy of the Tsar and the Metropolitan of St. Petersburg, while the other is purely Greek in its membership and nationality. The newspaper went on to explain that the Greek church wants no one but those of Hellenic blood among its members. Still, these ethnic divisions did not necessarily preclude inter-Orthodox cooperation. On October 7th, 1894, which was the feast day of St. Sergius, the Chicago Greek and Russian priests concelebrated the Divine Liturgy at the Russian Church to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Orthodoxy in the New World. When Tsar Alexander III died the following month, a panakida was served by both the Greek and Russian priests at the Greek Church, which was simultaneously dedicating its new building. Likewise, both Greek churches in New York City held memorials for the Tsar, one of which was attended by the Russian consul. And remember, at this time, there was no Russian church in New York City, so the Russian consul in New York attends the Greek church for the memorial. When the Russian Bishop Nicholas visited Chicago in December, the local Greek priest participated in the hierarchical Divine Liturgy. While not acknowledging him as his bishop, he was still interacting with him. This particularization among the Greeks in Chicago would not long remain limited to simple nationality. In 1897, a faction of the parish complained to the Metropolitan of Athens that Father Fiambulis was unpatriotic. In response, the Metropolitan sent Father Theodore Papaconstantine to Chicago to replace Fiambulis. And Fiambulis complained to the newspapers. He gave an interview and he said, "The Metropolitan sent a priest before consulting the trustees of the church, which he should not have done according to the laws of the church." Fiambulis said the present trouble is partially his fault. Father John Erickson has explained that the Annunciation parish was dominated by Greeks from Sparta, and that the Arcadian Greeks in the community wanted their own parish, complete with a priest from Arcadia. So they then broke away and formed Chicago's second Greek church. They were dividing not just on national lines, but village lines. In both New York City and Chicago, the 2 largest cities in America at the time, independent Greek parishes preceded their Russian counterparts. The Greeks in those cities had established a precedent which would be followed by their countrymen throughout the United States. From 1900 to 1917, more than 340,000 Greeks, which is nearly 19,000 per year, came to America. The late Bishop George Papayannou writes, "Administratively, there was complete chaos. There was virtually no episcopal oversight of the Greek parishes." Erickson notes, "The Greek parishes in practice were independent of any authority beyond the local community." One of the earliest Greek parishes in America was established in Lowell, Massachusetts, and it's a good example of this chaos. In 1900, the Lowell Greek parish was divided. One portion of the parish wanted to discharge their priest, Father Nathaniel Sedaris, and hire a new one. "We have the right to tell a priest that he is no longer needed and to engage another priest," one parish leader explained. Other parishioners were appalled at such an approach. "Our complaint," said the leader of the opposition, "is that the people upstairs are conducting the affairs of a Greek church different from anything to which we have been accustomed, and we do not consider it right. The bishop of the Greek church in Athens alone has the power to assign a priest." 8 years later, virtually the same scenario repeated itself in Lowell, with part of the community deciding they want to fire the priest, and the priest himself appealing to the Metropolitan of Athens. And the newspaper in this later episode writes, "If the Greek Orthodox community here refuses to recognize the authority of the Metropolitan of the Greek Church in Athens, the priest will be transferred to some other Greek church in this country." Now, the striking fact about both of these incidents is that no Russian bishop is mentioned by either party. The Russians seem not even to exist. One side wanted total independence from all hierarchy. The trustees were supposed to govern everything. The other side acknowledged the authority of the Church of Greece. The Russians, as far as these people were concerned, were irrelevant. Now, both the Greek Church and the Ecumenical Patriarchate oversaw Greek parishes and priests in America. Greek churches in Salt Lake City and Washington, D.C. were under Athens. Those in Lynn, Massachusetts and Savannah, Georgia acknowledged the authority of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. The first Orthodox services in Birmingham, Alabama were performed by an Archimandrite Dorotheo, whose holy chrism came from Constantinople, but who commemorated both the Ecumenical Patriarch and the Metropolitan of Athens during the Divine Liturgy. When a Greek parish was formed in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Inquirer noted that the church is governed from Athens and is not connected with the Russian Greek Church, although the doctrines are essentially the same. But 2 years later, a black Episcopal deacon who had been attending that same Philadelphia parish traveled not to Athens but to Constantinople to be ordained an Orthodox priest. This man, Father Raphael Morgan, was then sent back to America by the Ecumenical Patriarchate to, quote, "carry the light of the Orthodox faith among his racial brothers." So the Ecumenical Patriarchate had sent a black missionary to convert black Americans to Orthodoxy in 1907. At times, the Russian hierarchy attempted to assert ecclesiastical authority over the trustee-governed Greek parishes. Now, such action was not taken kindly by the Greeks, to say the least. For example, on Great and Holy Friday in 1904, Archbishop Tikhon, the Russian bishop in America, visited Holy Trinity, which was the uptown Greek church in New York City. And Father John Erickson writes, "He was barred from entering by its angry trustees who feared a Russian takeover of their parish properties." Now, to understand the reaction of the Greeks, this sort of violent reaction, consider that just weeks earlier, Father Raphael Hawawini, who was, of course, the leader of the Russian-backed Syrian contingent, was consecrated to the episcopate in Brooklyn by Archbishop Tikhon, and this was widely reported in the press to have taken place on orders from the Tsar. The Greeks viewed this as a Russian imperial encroachment into the affairs of the Orthodox Church life in America, and they felt threatened. Now, at the same time, there was globally a Greek fear of Russian takeover. On Mount Athos, Father John Erickson has explained to me, on Mount Athos, at about the same time, the Russian church was buying up property, and the Greeks were very concerned about this. So this was not just unique to America, this fear of Russian imperialism ecclesiastically. This tension was exacerbated in 1909 when the New York Greeks protested legislation in the government that would have placed them under the legal authority of the Russian consul. The Russian church was pushing for this legislation. The Greeks were opposing it. There are, however, examples of cooperation that we shouldn't forget. For instance, in 1902, Archbishop Tikhon celebrated the Divine Liturgy in a Chicago Greek parish entirely in the Greek language. In the teens, the 19-teens, Father Demetrios Petridis, who was the Greek priest in Atlanta, Georgia, and Father Leonid Turkevich, future Metropolitan Leonti, and at the time a leading Russian priest, were the two Orthodox representatives to the official dialogue group, the Anglican and Eastern Orthodox Churches Union. So they were cooperating in various levels, but it certainly wasn't a universal thing. It is not entirely clear whether the Russian Archdiocese itself even considered the Greeks to be under its own jurisdiction. The Russian Church issued official lists of churches published in 1906, 1911, and 1918. They include no Greek communities. Only 3 ethnic Greek priests are known to have actually acknowledged the authority of the Russian hierarchy. Their names, and forgive me if I mispronounce something, Father Theoklitos Triantafilides, Father Michael Andriades, and Father Kalinikos Kanelos. They are the only verified known Greek priests to have acknowledged Russian authority. They were all, I believe, educated in Russia as well. In addition, this is rather late, but 6 Greek parishes in the years 1916 to 1918 reportedly requested antimencia from the Russian Archdiocese. This was a tumultuous period in the life of the church, the late teens, and they were asking for assistance from the Russian church. Now, to put these numbers into perspective, consider that by 1916 there were 103 Greek priests and 87 Greek parishes in the United States. Barbara McGahan, who was a well-known journalist and a co-founder of the Russian Orthodox Church in New York City, and despite her Irish-sounding last name, she was actually a Russian and one of the most prominent Orthodox lay people in America at the turn of the century. She's, again, been totally forgotten, but a very notable person in her own day. She wrote a letter to the Washington Post in 1903, and I'll quote from it. She said, "The Greek priests in this country are not under the rule of the Russian Bishop of America, the Right Reverend Tikhon. There is no Greek bishop in this country at all. The direction extended over the Greek clergy here from far-off Athens is exceedingly lax, in consequence of which the Greek priests here struggle along without any ecclesiastical guidance or supervision, and are apt to indulge in grievous irregularities as to church observances, for which the Russian church clergy, under the steady guidance of Bishop Tikhon, should not be held responsible." They're not with us. In 1900, in his report to his annual report on the diocese, St. Tikhon himself wrote, "There are in America several Greek clergymen. Ecclesiastically, they depend either upon the Patriarchate of Constantinople or the Archbishop of Athens, but in fact they are dependent upon neither and remain without any kind of oversight." He went on, "The Greek clergy ought to submit to some sort of diocesan oversight, all the more so because they are now living within the Orthodox North American diocese, but this issue is beyond my competence." A few years later, in 1904, in the 1904 report, I should say, St. Tikhon proposed, as he would do again in his more famously, he proposed that there be a Greek bishop in America under the Russian church, just like he had St. Raphael. He was proposing a similar arrangement for the Greeks. But then he said, "However, it is difficult to trust the Greeks. Although they have parishes in America, some are dependent upon the Synod of Athens, some on the Patriarchate of Constantinople, and some on Jerusalem." And then in parentheses he said, with an exclamation point, "Quite a weak dependence. And according to the politics characteristic of
viewer,
Greeks,
welcome
they
to
would
the
hardly wish to be
stream,
under any
the
kind of
Orthodox
subjection
Oasis.
to
My
the
name is
Russian
Jerome.
hierarchy." In 1908,
Jump into the
the
chat and say
Ecumenical
hello.
Patriarchate issued its now
Playing
famous
some Final
Tomos,
Fantasy II.
transferring the Greek Orthodox
Listening to a
parishes, which
podcast about the
quotation
history of the
marks because it
Orthodox
became
Church in
somewhat
America.
controversial later. But the Greek Orthodox parishes in America from its own jurisdiction to that of the Church of Greece. Now, in a paper on early Greek parishes in America, Father Alexander Demouros explains that this was in response to pressure from the Ottoman government in Turkey, which was upset with the anti-Turkish stance of many of the Greek clergy in America. The Russian Church, says Demouros, then declared that all the Orthodox in America, the Greeks included, were under its authority. The Ecumenical Patriarchate did not agree, however, instead issuing this tomos and transferring its rights in America to the Church of Greece. Demouros claims that this was the first pronouncement made of a separate jurisdiction in America apart from the Russian diocese. Now, if by pronouncement Demouros means an official declaration such as a patriarchal tomos, then perhaps he is technically correct. But this is rather misleading. Even before the 1908 tomos, the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the Church of Greece were both sending priests to America, resolving parish disputes, consecrating Holy Chrism for use in the New World, and even in the case of Father Raphael Morgan, commissioning missionaries to evangelize Americans. In any event, the tomos affected only a portion of the Greek churches, since many of them already acknowledged the Metropolitan of Athens. The fact that the Ecumenical Patriarchate would issue such a decree, however, is confirmation that it did not consider America to be the exclusive territory of the Russian Orthodox Church. To summarize, then, the Greeks, the typical Greek parish in America was founded and run by a lay board of trustees, without the participation, consent, or even, at times, knowledge of the Russian hierarchy. It was pastored by priests sent from Greece or Constantinople, again without the participation, consent, or knowledge of the Russian bishops. These parishes were privately incorporated. Legally, they were independent entities. While it is true that no Greek bishop actually physically resided in America until 1918, and that no formal hierarchical structure was formed until 1921, it does not follow that the Greeks were therefore under the Russian hierarchy. Virtually all of the Greeks, who in 1916 represented 48% of all the Orthodox Christians in America, constituted a distinct group independent of the Russian Archdiocese. Now, the same sort of thing cannot be said for the Syrians and the Serbs, most of whom generally maintained, at least officially, ties to the Russian Church
not the
into
Queen.
late 19-teens. The arrival of then Bishop Tikhon and Father Raphael Hawawini in the latter half of the 1890s ushered in a new era for the Russian Archdiocese in America. This period is considered by many to be a sort of golden age of inter-ethnic Orthodox unity. Father John Meindorf asserts that the Russian Archdiocese, quote, always defined itself in territorial and not in ethnic terms. In contradistinction, he says, from the principle which became the basis for the existence of the Greek Archdiocese, created in 1921 specifically for Americans of Greek background and using Greek as their liturgical language. But when Archbishop Tikhon presented his well-known blueprint for the future of American Orthodoxy in 1905, his entire vision was founded upon ethnic, not territorial, jurisdictions. He spoke of the multinational character of the Archdiocese, composed of several Orthodox churches, he said, each with its own peculiarities which should be accommodated and preserved. Bishop Raphael was consecrated Bishop of Brooklyn and head of the Syro-Arab mission in 1904. He was an auxiliary to Archbishop Tikhon, but to use Tikhon's own words, he is, quote, almost independent in his own sphere. Likewise, the Serbs were organized into their own group within the Archdiocese, headed by the American-born Serbian Archimandrite Sebastian Dabovic, whom Tikhon eventually hoped to consecrate a bishop. Tikhon looked forward to the day when the Greeks too would have their own bishop, sent by the Holy Synod of Athens, but operating under the ultimate authority of the Russian Archbishop.
This game has a side character problem.
Tikhon said, each one of them is to be independent in its own sphere, but the common affairs of the American Church are decided in a synod presided by the Russian Archbishop. In the end, he hoped for an American church which would be divided into ethnic, not territorial, dioceses: Russian, Alaskan, Syrian, Serbian, and Greek. It should be remembered, Tikhon emphasized, that life in the New World is different from that of the Old. Our church must take this into consideration. Now, such a principle is borne out even at that very early date. In Chicago, for example, there were 5 Orthodox churches by 1912. 2 of them were Greek, 1 was Russian, 1 Syrian, and 1 Serbian. The Greeks rejected Russian authority altogether. The Syrians had a bishop of their own, Raphael. The Serbs likewise answered directly to Dabovich rather than directly to the Russian archbishop. A similar situation existed in Pittsburgh, with each group, Greek, Russian, Syrian, and Serbian, having its own parish. The Russians had a parish in Brooklyn, home of the Syrian cathedral. The Syrians had a parish in New York City, home of the Russian cathedral. The 2 groups also overlapped in Boston and Wilkes-Barre, and in all cases, each ethnic parish was answerable to its own ethnic bishop. The principle of territorial jurisdiction was most emphatically not employed.
One of
In
those
fact,
boards
in a
where
city
you
like
put
Chicago,
the
the situation was not
string
so
everywhere to
very
figure out
different
which
than a typical American city today.
ethnic group is part of which church and which city.
Another example of ethnic separation is the Mayfield Church Council of 1907, envisioned by Archbishop Tikhon and hailed as the first all-American Sobor. The Sobor was scheduled to coincide with the convention of the Russian Orthodox Catholic Mutual Aid Society, which was meeting in the same city. Sessions of the Sobor took place in between meetings of the convention. Neither Bishop Raphael nor Father Sebastian Dabovich attended, and there is no evidence that any other Syrians or Serbs were present. In other words, despite its nickname, All-American, the council was really Russian. Visionary as it was in its process, the Sobor did not include the non-Russian ethnic groups, even the ones that were nominally under the Russian Archdiocese, further emphasizing the view that the other Orthodox groups were indeed almost independent.
Take a swig of water. Swig of water. You can do it.
The extent to which Bishop Raphael was almost independent may come as a surprise to some. He was, says Paul Garrett, consulted before virtually every important decision in the Antiochian Patriarchate and informed of the outcome directly thereafter.
Knock, knock. Give
In
back
his
the
own periodical,
princess,
Al
queen,
Kalimat,
person,
which means the
thingamabob.
Raphael reported that his consecration was, quote, by the order and permission of Meletios, the Patriarch of Antioch, and that Patriarch Meletios counted the new parish of Brooklyn, New York as one of the parishes of Antioch, end quote. St. Raphael went on to say that Patriarch Meletios declared that he, and I'll quote again, had instituted the new diocese as one of the dioceses pertaining to the See of Antioch, and thus it is in actuality, notwithstanding its nominal allegiance to the Russian Holy Synod. Furthermore, St. Raphael said, the territorial jurisdiction of the See of Antioch became much more extensive during the time of his beatitude, Patriarch Meletios.
Is that the Emperor of the Empire? Excuse me? It was a trap!
Syrians who immigrated to other countries still retained their spiritual relations with and continued to acknowledge and yield allegiance to their mother church, the Holy Church of Antioch, end quote. Now, while the relationship between the Syro-Arab mission and the Russian Archdiocese may indeed have been nominal, as St. Raphael said, this relationship did exist, and it existed chiefly in the person of St. Raphael himself. His relationship with Russia and Antioch was ambiguous, and this ambiguity was strengthened by his own words and actions. There was a dispute in 1923 between factions of a Syrian parish, and the courts got involved, and the judge observed in his decision with some frustration, and I'll quote, at first the writings of Bishop Raphael
See how many more monsters he throws at us.
Antioch jurisdiction over the Syrian branch of the Orthodox Church in the United States. And later,
throw the monster
expression to
the
language
princess
indicating
if it
that
beat
all
us?
the branches, including the Syrian branch of the Greek Orthodox Church in America, were under the jurisdiction of the Holy Synod of Russia, end quote. It is also worth noting that no Syrian names appear on the published lists of students at the early Russian seminaries in Minneapolis and Tenafly, New Jersey. In Bishop Raphael's lifetime, his authority over the Syrians...
No. 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 Why didn't we fight back? Because the game's gotta happen. It's so silly.
...was unquestioned, and his ties to both Antioch and Russia were not seen as contradictory. But after his death in 1915, the Syro-Arab mission split. Some wanted to retain their ties with the Russians, while others favored subordination to Antioch. The judge, whom I quoted earlier, explained, a meeting was held of the Syrian priests who were present at Raphael's funeral, and a division of minds existed and was then expressed as to whether or not Raphael, as Bishop of Brooklyn, was subordinate to the Holy Synod of Russia or to the Patriarch of Antioch, and whether the successor of Raphael as Bishop of Brooklyn should be a Syrian or whether he might be a Russian. This was happening well in advance of 1917. As far as many Syrians were concerned, they were a separate group. Bishop Raphael had spoken only of nominal allegiance to Russia, and Archbishop Tikhon had considered the Syrian bishop to be almost independent. The ethnic lines, then, were drawn by the Russian leadership, by even that most visionary of bishops, St. Tikhon. That the gulf would widen in the years following the death of the unifying figure of Bishop Raphael was largely inevitable. Now, among the Serbs, too, there was a growing movement towards ecclesiastical independence from the Russians. The leader of the Serbian mission was Father Sebastian Dabovic, and he was ordained a priest by the Russian Bishop Nicholas in San Francisco in 1892. 2 years after this, Dabovic oversaw the founding of the first Serbian parish in America in Jackson, California. Bishop Nicholas reportedly called for the parish to be chartered as a Russian church, while Dabovic and the Serbs insisted that it be Serbian. This dispute was ultimately resolved in the civil courts, with the Serbs emerging as victorious. According to St. Nikolai Velimirovich, who knew Father Sebastian Dabovic, Dabovic and the Russian hierarchy clashed over this issue on numerous other occasions in various parts of the United States. Of course, the Serbian parishes do appear, like the Syrians, on the official Russian lists of parishes in 1906, 1911, and 1918. Yet, like that of their Syrian counterparts, the Serbian position was somewhat ambiguous. Of the Serbian priests, some were affiliated, and I'm quoting here from Father Mladen I can't pronounce this. Yes, Trubakovic. Some were affiliated with their respective church jurisdiction in the old country, while others served under the Russian Orthodox Church in America, end quote. When the Serbian parish in Kansas City found itself without a priest in 1909, it did not appeal to the Russian bishop, but rather placed advertisements in the Serbian language American newspapers, hoping to lure a priest from another Serbian church. When that failed, the parish considered, quote, writing to the Patriarch of Constantinople, asking him to secure for them the service of a young priest. When the Serbian parish of Chisholm, Minnesota was organized in 1910, the local Serbian society president traveled to Europe himself in search of a priest. When the church building was dedicated in Chisholm in 1912, the priest who performed the dedication did so under the authority of the Bishop of Sarajevo. As early as 1897, both Dabovic and the Russian Bishop Nicholas wrote to the Metropolitan of Serbia to request that the Serbian parishes in America be placed under the care of the Serbian Church. The Metropolitan declined, citing an inability to support the necessary infrastructure. This was 1897. In the coming years, the Russian Archdiocese, and Dabovic in particular, would make numerous overtures to the Serbian Church in an effort to obtain a bishop for the Serbs. Yet to many of his fellow Serbs, Dabovich was a Russophile because of his cooperation with the Russian Archdiocese. The Serbs, writes Father Damascene Christensen, did not wish to support or be united under the Serbian Orthodox mission because it was within the jurisdiction of the Russian Church. The 1909 Catholic Encyclopedia reports the Serbian Orthodox Church is closely affiliated to the Russian Church in this country, except that some of their churches do not recognize the jurisdiction or authority of the Russian Archbishop.
Deathflower.
At a convention held in Chicago in 1913, the Serbian parishes voted to secede formally from the Russian Church, from the Russian Archdiocese, and they asked to be received into the Serbian Church. This was 1913. For various reasons, this didn't actually culminate until after World War I. However, at the parish level, there was little sense of or desire for unity with the Russian Archdiocese. The Serbs wished to make their own way in America. Contrary to the version of the past presented by Father Alexander Schmemann, the first epiphany of Orthodoxy in America was precisely a jungle of ethnic ecclesiastical colonies. The Greeks, the largest body of Orthodox in America, were, with a few exceptions, independent of Russian authority and only loosely tied to the Old World churches of Constantinople and Athens. The Serbs, while technically a part of the Russian Archdiocese, to a large degree resented Russian leadership and from an early stage sought to join the Church of Serbia. The Syrians did recognize the jurisdiction of the Russian Archbishop, but they maintained close ties to the Patriarchate of Antioch, and Bishop Raphael himself used the word nominal to describe the Syrian-Russian relationship. One is forced to conclude that at no point in its history was Orthodoxy in America administratively united. Ethnic divisions and overlapping jurisdictions have existed from the earliest days of Orthodoxy in America. The roots of these divisions can be found in the very identities of Orthodox Americans themselves. These people, these early Orthodox Americans, immigrants, most of them male, few of them educated, viewed their Orthodox faith as an integral aspect of their cultural identity. But in this, Orthodoxy stood side by side with language, food, music, and so forth. Ethnic interests, says Father John Erickson, superseded a vision of the Church as a community of faith, a community open in principle to all nations and all peoples. Thus, there is no glorious, unified past upon which Orthodox Americans may look back, no golden age to which we must return. Now, one might be tempted to view this conclusion as a negative. However, one might also argue that the truth of the American Orthodox past is far more positive than any myth of unity. The myth of unity is basically a story of loss and failure. A once blissful and united American Orthodox Church suffers the departure of Archbishop Tikhon, the untimely death of Bishop Raphael, the tragedy of the Bolshevik Revolution, followed by the rebellion of the Greeks and the ethnic fragmentation of the formerly united Russian Archdiocese. By implication, the Greek Archdiocese is illegitimate, and the presence of the Antiochian, Serbian, and other jurisdictions in America is, as Schmemann puts it, a sin and a tragedy. Following this logic, the only legitimate Orthodox body in America is the OCA. Everyone else is uncanonical. The true story is much different. Orthodoxy was brought to America by simple immigrants. The wonder is that these immigrants managed to preserve their Orthodox faith in a foreign land bent on turning them into good Americans. They spent their money to build Orthodox churches. They brought priests over from the old country. They made an investment in their faith, and it is largely because of that investment that Orthodoxy exists in America today. This is true even of those who made up the Russian Archdiocese. The great bulk of its members were former Uniates, Eastern Rite Catholics deemed unwelcome in America by the Latin Rite hierarchy. Rather than submit to the pressure to conform, they chose to remain true to their traditions and join the Orthodox Church. Had they bowed to that pressure, and had the Greeks, Syrians, Serbs, and others given in to the urging of so much of America to conform, there would be no American Orthodoxy. The price of that preservation, however, was ethnic separation. These immigrants were not missionaries or theologians or far-sighted visionaries. They were simple people trying to make a life for themselves and their families, and in the process hold on to the things that mattered to them, their culture, their traditions, and their Orthodox faith. But their orthodoxy was not an abstract reality, distinct from their fundamental identity. For many, faithfulness to ethnicity and faithfulness to orthodoxy were one and the same. But the positive aspect of this is that fidelity to one's identity implied a fidelity to one's Orthodox faith. The United States of America is a country of immigrants, and this was never more true than in the period from 1890 to 1920, which not coincidentally was the precise period when Orthodoxy was established in in the United States of America. Rather than view ethnicity as a negative, one could view it as a necessary tool which, through God's providence, allowed Orthodoxy to be firmly planted in the New World. The seeds of administrative unity were present from the beginning, but they were in the initial stages of bearing fruit. American Orthodoxy is, to paraphrase the Apostle Paul, working out its unity in fear and trembling. By letting go of the mythical past, American Orthodox Christians can be free of it and can begin to move towards a fuller unity, not blaming one another or scapegoating historical figures or lamenting past misfortunes, but taking responsibility here and now to make unity real in their own communities. It should be an encouragement to American Orthodox Christians to know that in many respects they are more united now than at any other time in history. The number and quality of pan-Orthodox institutions, organizations, and cooperative efforts in America today is without precedent. These range from national agencies of SCOBA to the local grassroots groups such as Orthodox schools and nursing homes. The use of English in church services is undoubtedly more prevalent than in times past. Furthermore, a recent study indicates that more than 80% of American Orthodox Christians desire jurisdictional unity. It is beyond the scope of this paper to document the nature and extent of present unity of American Orthodoxy. However, it must be emphasized that nothing approaching this sort of cooperation and common ground existed during the supposed Golden Age. The closest approximation of a Golden Age is the present. The following quotation from a recent article by Father John Baer seems an appropriate conclusion to this paper. He writes, "Perhaps we should not think, as we are wont to do, of the unity of the one church that we desire as something we once had but have since lost. Perhaps we should see it rather as a unity towards which we are always moving as we sojourn in the changing circumstances of this world, seeking a citizenship that ultimately lies in the heavens." Thank you.
Good talk. I think because I screamed a good amount of time, and I'm probably going to call it soon.
American Orthodox History with Matthew Naiman.
Honestly.
Matthew is a writer and lecturer specializing in early American Orthodoxy and the Associate Director of the Society for Orthodox Christian History in the Americas.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll go right here. That's a good place to stop. All right, well, everybody who watched or is watching the VOD, thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, that kind of stuff. Sure, if you want to. Otherwise, thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you and keep you always. This has been the Orthodox Oasis. My name is Jeremy Hieronymus, and may you have a good night. Hey, thanks for watching. You can find more VODs here on YouTube, as well as other projects, including reviews of games I've played and movies I've watched. You could also stop by the channel, Orthodox Oasis, over on Twitch. Join us live, hang out, say hi, and all that good stuff. Otherwise, thanks for watching. This has been the Orthodox Oasis. My name is Jerome Hieronymus, and may the Lord bless you and keep you always. Bye.